check back in on something, see how it's going.
Yeah, like that plant you forgot to water, maybe.
Haha, exactly.
Yeah.
Or, is my car still making that weird noise? Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip&Talk. Well, today we're checking in on something maybe a bit bigger.
That's right. We're diving back into, well, the whole Trump tariff situation. It feels like a topic that just keeps evolving, doesn't it?
It really does. And for anyone who needs a quick refresher, these are those taxes, the tariffs the U.S. put on stuff coming in from other countries, especially China a few years back, part of a larger trade plan.
Right. But that's not the only thing on the agenda today.
Nope. There's also this really fascinating development happening over in Saudi Arabia. Involves some major U.S. tech companies and a seriously ambitious AI project, humane AI.
Yeah, that caught my eye too. And we're also going to try and unpack something else. Why China always seems to be claiming victory, especially in the trade context with the U.S.
You hear it constantly, right? We're winning. But what's actually going on? We'll look at some examples of how they frame it, like indirectly saying Trump backed down or U.S. policy isn't working. And
finally, how people are reacting to all this, public opinion, what folks are saying online and elsewhere.
So for you, our listener, maybe you follow this stuff but don't want to get bogged down in super dense economic reports. Our mission today is simple.
Yeah, we want to cut through all the noise, give you a clear picture of the tariffs, this pretty interesting U.S.-Saudi tech thing, and the nuances behind China's whole winning narrative.
Exactly. Aiming for those aha moments without the headache. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's kick off with the tariffs.
It's kind of wild, right?
One minute you hear trade wars could tank the economy. The next, the U.S. stock market is just hanging out near all-time highs.
It is a bit of whiplash. There's definitely a sense of optimism or maybe relief in the air right now.
What's driving that, do you think?
Well, it's interesting how sentiment shifts. Not too long ago, there was a lot more anxiety. But now you have figures like the U.S. National Economic Council Director Hassett kind of hinting that a major new trade deal might be announced soon, right after Trump gets back from the Middle East.
Ah, okay. That kind of talk can definitely move the needle on market mood.
For sure. And it seems like there are a couple of things feeding into this optimism. First, there's that temporary pause, that 90-day truce in the trade fight with China.
Right. Always helps calm nerves a bit.
Yeah, it gives everyone some breathing room. But there's also talk of big orders coming out of the Middle East, specifically for AI chips.
Oh, interesting. Who's buying?
Well, it's benefiting companies like AMD and NVIDIA pretty significantly. They're getting some serious funding boosts, apparently. That demand is real.
Huh. AI chips in the desert. Didn't see that coming as a major market driver.
It connects to the bigger picture, you see. The need for AI infrastructure globally is just massive. And companies like AMD, they just announced a, $6 billion stock buyback.
Whoa.
Yeah. And in NVIDIA, too. They're right in the sweet spot. Plus, you add in predictions that U.S. companies overall might buy back $1 trillion of their own stock this year.
$1 trillion. Okay, yeah, that'll definitely juice the market.
Absolutely. It gives share prices a real lift.
So it sounds like part of this surge is also maybe a feeling that Trump's approach might be softening or changing somehow.
That perception seems to be a major factor, yeah. It apparently caught a lot of the big money players, hedge funds, fund managers, kind of off guard.
They were betting on more conflict, maybe?
Possibly expecting more volatility, more gloom, and when things pivot, even slightly, or the perception pivots, the market reacts strongly.
It really shows how much expectations matter, doesn't it?
Totally. And you see this reflected in analyst predictions. JP Morgan, for example, raised their target for the S&P 500 index, and they specifically mentioned easing U.S.-China relations as a big part of why.
Right, okay. And it's not just them.
Nope. Goldman Sachs significantly walked back their predictions of a year-end recession. That's a pretty notable shift.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have analysts like Ed Yardeni throwing out some really high numbers for the S&P, targeting 6,500 or so.
Wow. That's optimistic. A big change from some of the doom and gloom we heard before.
It is. But it's important to remember, those earlier worries weren't baseless. The uncertainty around trade policy, Trump's unpredictability that caused real market swings.
Sure.
And the potential for tariffs to actually eat into company profits. That's still a valid concern. So while the optimism is real right now, the underlying issues haven't just vanished.
Right. So the market's finding ways to cope. Or maybe looking past the immediate tariff impact towards things like AI demand.
Could be. It suggests maybe a decoupling where the market's performance isn't solely tied to the day-to-day tariff news. It's adapting.
Okay, fascinating stuff. So let's totally switch gears now. This humane AI initiative in Saudi Arabia sounds almost like science fiction.
It really does have that vibe, but it's very real, and the U.S. involvement is pretty significant.
Tell us about it. Who was there? What's the goal?
Well, the event itself showcased this growing U.S.-Saudi partnership in AI and tech. The guest list was pretty stacked. You had Jensen Huang from NVIDIA.
The CEO, right. Big player.
Huge. Alex Karp from Palantir, Ruth Porat from Google, Elon Musk wearing like all his different hats, Tesla, XAI, Starlink, Boring Company.
Busy guy.
So a really high-profile gathering.
Wow. That signals something serious is happening.
It really does. It highlights Saudi Arabia's major push to become a leader in AI. They had this grand opening for Humane, which they're framing as their national AI company. It's symbolic.
So not just dabbling, they're serious.
Very serious. The plans with NVIDIA are massive. They're starting with a 500-megawatt AI deployment.
Which is already pretty big for AI infrastructure, right?
Oh, yeah. But the plan is to scale that up to 1.9 gigawatts by 2030.
Gigawatts. Okay, that's enormous.
It is. They're focusing on building the absolute foundations. Data centers, getting the most advanced chips, developing the core AI models. This isn't just buying software off the shelf.
They're building the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And the underlying goal is pretty clear. Transform the economy, move beyond oil dependence towards a digital, intelligent future.
And they're actually making progress on that front already.
Apparently so. The contribution from non-oil sectors now reportedly exceeds oil revenue. That's a fundamental shift.
That's huge. What's enabling this push, besides the money?
The sources mention this real can-do attitude. They seem to have strong engineering talent and a genuine openness to adopting new technologies.
And where are they looking to apply AI?
Across the board, really.
Yeah.
Things like healthcare, making government services more efficient, and even physical AI robotics.
Robotics, too. Interesting.
Yeah. And another positive note mentioned is the high participation of women in their tech sector.
That's great to hear.
And it's not just using existing tech. They have entrepreneurs there actively researching really cutting-edge concepts like something called Model Context Protocol, or MCP.
MCPs. Sounds technical. What's that about?
Basically, it's a sophisticated way for AI to better understand context and relationships within massive amounts of data. Think deeper understanding, more nuanced analysis. It shows they're not just users, they're thinking about the next steps.
Gotcha. And NVIDIA's role in all this?
Jensen Huang was there talking about AI's evolution, from perception AI, just seeing things, to generative AI, which we see a lot now.
Like ChatGPT and image generators.
Right. Then the current stage, agentic AI that can reason, plan, use tools, and looking ahead to physical AI, robotics that understand and interact with the physical world.
So covering the whole spectrum.
And NVIDIA, of course, is positioning itself as the key enabler, providing the essential hardware, the computing power to make all of this happen.
But with all this powerful AI comes risk, right? Did that come up?
Oh, definitely. It's a major theme. Alex Karp from Palantir was apparently quite blunt, calling AI a potentially dangerous weapon and stressing the need for good people to control its development.
A common concern.
Yeah. And Ruth Porat from Google took maybe a slightly different angle, emphasizing a bold but responsible approach. Maximize the benefits, manage the downsides. Her concern was also that too much regulation too early could stifle progress.
The classic innovation versus safety dilemma.
Exactly. And related to that was the issue of preventing advanced tech from ending up in the wrong hands, these concerned nations.
How do you even do that? Seems tough.
Well, one practical point made was that these huge AI server setups, these massive racks, aren't exactly easy to smuggle across borders.
Good point. Not like slipping a phone in your pocket.
Right. So the thinking is, with proper monitoring and controls, you can manage the transfer to trusted allies, like Saudi Arabia. It allows U.S. tech to spread without falling into adversarial hands.
And there's a strategic advantage to that, I assume.
Absolutely. Promoting U.S. technology, getting allies to adopt it, helps establish it as the global standard. It's part of winning that global AI race.
Makes sense. Build your ecosystem.
And it all ties back to the long-standing strategic alliance between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Under a potential Trump administration, the strategy seems to lean towards building this broad network of partners.
So encouraging allies like Saudi Arabia to adopt and innovate on top of the U.S. tech stack.
Exactly, which could be seen as a shift away from potentially more restrictive tech diffusion policies of the past.
And does this fit into a broader economic picture? maybe under Trump.
It seems to. The outline touches on a potential Trump economic agenda focused on reshaping trade, possibly making the 2017 tax cuts permanent.
Including things like that 100% expensing for investments.
Right, that feature specifically. Plus, significant deregulation, all aimed at boosting economic growth and controlling inflation. It's a whole package.
Got it. And Elon Musk was there too, you said. What was he showing off?
Well, besides the AI stuff with XAI, he demoed Tesla's Optimus robot.
The humanoid robot.
Yeah, and he talked about this vision of, like, billions of humanoid robots dramatically increasing economic output, maybe even leading to universal high income.
Whoa, that's ambitious.
Very. He also touched on robo-taxes, the fact that Starlink just got approved for maritime and aviation use in Saudi Arabia.
Big news for connectivity there.
Huge. And the Boring Company's ideas for urban transport tunnels, it's like a whole suite of future tech being presented.
And XAI, what's their specific angle?
Their stated goal is developing artificial general intelligence, AGI, with a focus on seeking truth to understand the universe. Pre-philosophical.
Okay, definitely reaching high.
So pulling it all together, it paints this picture of a really forward-looking partnership focused on AI, robotics, economic transformation, tech leadership, all built on that U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship.
And the idea is that the real competition now isn't just tanks and planes. It's chips, AI models, quantum computing.
That seems to be the underlying message, yes. The 21st century competition is shifting to the technological domain.
Okay, wow. Lots happening there. Now, let's pivot back to something that's kind of always humming in the background of U.S.-China relations, this idea of who won the trade war.
Right. It's a question that refuses to go away. And the sources suggest the answer is really, it depends on your perspective.
How so?
Well, psychologically or maybe emotionally, China might feel like a winner to many within China. But factually, both sides have clearly taken hits. And logically, there's probably no single clear winner.
Okay, let's break that down. Start with the psychological side. What's the thinking there?
A big factor is the concept of face in Chinese culture. It's incredibly important. The government and media have consistently projected this image of resilience, of not backing down. That boosts national pride.
And they point to specific things.
Oh, yeah. Like China's Q1 economic growth in 2025 being 5.4%, while the U.S. economy actually contracted slightly by 0.3%. That comparison gets highlighted a lot as a short-term win.
I bet. Gives them bragging rights, sort of.
Exactly. And you see it online, that patriotic sentiment, businesses displaying slogans. It reinforces that narrative of being unyielding.
So the official media plays a big role.
Huge. Outlets like People's Daily will emphasize how U.S. policies might hurt American consumers while stressing China's ability to withstand the pressure. It's constant reinforcement.
And there was that term chiku.
Right, chiku. It means enduring hardship for national goals. It's like a cultural value that helps prepare the public to accept some economic pain as part of a longer-term strategy against a major power. It feeds into that sense of psychological victory.
Okay, so that's the feeling, the narrative. What about the hard facts, the numbers?
The 2025 data shows a more complex story. You've got the U.S. imposing tariffs averaging around 145%, China retaliating with about 125%. Unsurprisingly, trade between them has dropped.
Yen the cost.
For U.S. households, one estimate puts the extra tax burden around $1,300 a year due to tariffs.
Ouch. That's real money.
It is. And while China's top-line growth looks better short-term, Chinese businesses have definitely been harmed too. Some analyses suggest bilateral trade could eventually plummet by 90%.
90%, that's staggering.
It is. And global trade could shrink by 5%, plus all the friction and inefficiency from companies scrambling to restructure their supply chains.
So definitely not painless for China either.
Not at all. Their share of exports going to the U.S. market has fallen significantly down from nearly 20% in 2018 to under 13% by 2023.
So they're trying to sell elsewhere.
Yeah, shifting towards Southeast Asia, Russia, other markets. But that takes time, costs money, and brings new risks, like bankruptcies for some Chinese firms.
And there was something about green energy, too.
Yeah, another analysis suggests the trade war might actually hinder China's green transition efforts, potentially increasing greenhouse gas emissions. That impacts long-term climate goals.
So factually, it's a picture of mutual pain, even if the short-term growth figures look different.
Pretty much. Long-term impacts are still unfolding, but both sides have paid a significant price.
Okay, so that brings us to the logical view. If we ask who won, we need to know what they were trying to achieve, right?
Exactly. What were the initial goals? For the U.S., it was things like reducing the trade deficit, protecting U.S. manufacturing, changing China's practices on intellectual property.
And did the tariffs achieve that?
Well, the trade deficit did shrink some, but as we said, it came at a cost: slower economic growth, higher consumer prices, and economists are pretty skeptical about whether tariffs really boosted manufacturing jobs significantly.
Okay. And China's goals?
Mainly, maintain economic growth and become less dependent on the U.S. market. They've had some success diversifying exports, but again, at a cost and with short-term pain for businesses and workers.
So logically, it's looking like
A lose-lose situation is probably the most accurate logical assessment. Neither side seems to have fully achieved its primary objectives without significant drawbacks. No clear winner emerges from that perspective.
Okay, so if the facts and logic point to a messy, costly situation for both, why the relentless "we won" narrative from China just can't afford to lose face?
It circles back to that cultural emphasis on face, combined with political necessity. The government needs to project strength and nationalism to maintain legitimacy and social stability.
So admitting any kind of setback is just not an option politically.
It seems very difficult. Sources mention a push towards emphasizing the domestic economy, building self-reliance, precisely to project an image of not needing the U.S.
It's managing the internal narrative.
Absolutely. And they have strong media control to promote this narrative, framing it as China standing firm for openness against U.S. closure or protectionism. So even if the economic reality is mutual damage, the official story has to be one of resilience and implicitly victory.
Got it. Now, the sources mention specific examples of China indirectly claiming Trump retreated or U.S. policy failed. Can you give us a couple?
Sure. One was a commentary in Xinhua, a major state news agency, back in May 2025. This was after those high U.S. tariffs were imposed, but China posted decent Q1 growth. The commentary basically said the U.S. trade war was like lifting a stone to drop it on its own feet, meaning it was self-destructive, causing U.S. economic problems.
And people online in China ran with that.
You bet. It was widely interpreted as proof that Trump's policies were backfiring.
Okay, what's another example?
There was an incident where Trump claimed in an interview that President Xi had called him to negotiate.
Oh, I remember hearing something about that.
Right. Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry immediately shot that down, flatly denied any recent calls, reiterated their stance that the U.S. must remove all tariffs first.
A very public rebuttal.
Exactly. Domestically, that played as China refusing to give Trump face, showing they held the stronger position.
Okay, makes sense from that perspective. Any others?
Another editorial, this time in the Global Times, also around May 2025, hammered the point that U.S. consumers were the ones paying the price for tariffs.
The hurting themselves argument again.
Pretty much. It argued U.S. tariffs ultimately harm Americans, while China's domestic focus and market diversification were softening the blow, pointing to strong Chinese export growth in April.
And the online reaction.
Similar interpretation. The U.S. is feeling the pain first. China is weathering the storm better.
Okay. And the last example involved netizens themselves.
Yeah, this was when news broke about the U.S. temporarily lowering some tariffs that 145% down to 30% for 90 days, and talks starting in Geneva.
Right, the truce.
Online comments just exploded on platforms like Weibo and Douyin, people saying things like, Trump can't hold on anymore, tariffs dropped, China won. Some even used phrases translating to, Trump knelt down.
Wow, knelt down, that's strong. Was there any official basis for that?
No official confirmation of anything like kneeling, of course, but that narrative spread like wildfire internally. Analysts noted how any perceived U.S. concession gets amplified massively within China to shore up domestic support.
Fascinating how narratives take hold. So how did all this play out more broadly in public opinion, inside China and internationally?
Okay, inside China, the dominant public reaction, at least what you see openly, was largely positive towards the government's stance. People pointed to the strong rhetoric, the economic data points, as evidence of victory.
Those hashtags you mentioned.
Yeah, things like hashtag China never kneels were trending. Lots of comments saying the U.S. blinked first on tariffs. But it's not monolithic.
Oh, there's pushback.
A smaller group, often on platforms known for slightly more critical discussion, questioned the official propaganda. Some felt the never kneel messaging wasn't very convincing internationally, even if it played well at home.
Interesting. What about outside China? How is it viewed?
Internationally, it was much more mixed. Some developing nations, particularly partners like the BRICS countries, seemed to align with China's narrative. You had, like, the Brazilian foreign minister echoing China's language about resisting bullying.
So some support for the U.S. isolated idea.
Indirectly, yeah.
Yeah.
But most Western media outlets were pretty skeptical. They tended to view the U.S. retreat claims as exaggerated.
What was their take?
Often, they attributed any U.S. tariff adjustments to domestic pressures, stock market jitters, business lobbying, rather than China forcing their hand or winning outright.
Right. Internal U.S. factors.
Exactly. And on social media platforms like X, you saw all sorts of opinions. Some arguing that China even agreeing to talks in Geneva, a neutral location, was actually a sign of weakness masked by tough talk.
So a real spectrum of views internationally. Okay, let's try to tie this all together using those perspectives again. Psychological, factual, logical. How does that help understand the public reaction?
Psychologically, it comes back to face. That strong cultural driver pushes officials and many netizens to frame any U.S. policy shift as a victory. It boosts national pride, maintains stability.
And explains the emotional language like Trump knelt down.
Exactly. It's an emotional expression of satisfaction, of standing up to a superpower, even if the factual basis is thin. The never kneel propaganda caters directly to this psychological need.
Okay, and factually.
Factually, while official statements don't say kneeling, they create an image of U.S. self-harm or isolation to project superiority. That May 2025 tariff reduction, likely a pragmatic compromise due to mutual economic pain, not a U.S. surrender.
Both sides needed some relief.
Probably. And while China's growth figures looked okay then, the propaganda ignored the costs, business failures, supply chain disruption. The U.S. contraction in consumer costs showed pressure, but again, not kneeling. Plus, agreeing to talks shows China wasn't negotiating from absolute strength either.
So the facts paint a much grayer picture.
Definitely. Logically, the basis for extreme claims like Trump knelt down is very weak. The tariff adjustments stemmed from shared economic pressures. There's still no clear winner. China's short-term numbers might have looked better, but export dependency remains a vulnerability. The U.S. took hits, but retained huge market leverage.
So interpreting adjustments as kneeling is?
Mostly propaganda. It fits the can't afford to lose face logic, builds the domestic image, maybe seeks some international support, but likely overestimates China's actual global sway based on this narrative alone.
It really highlights how complex these situations are beyond just the headlines.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive shows a world constantly shifting, doesn't it? You've got economic optimism bumping up against trade tensions, incredible tech ambition facing ethical questions, and national narratives often obscuring the messy reality of who's actually winning or losing.
Yeah. As you keep track of this stuff, you really have to think about the forces shaping the stories we hear.
And what the real measures of success even are in this kind of interconnected, complicated world.
Okay, this has been incredibly illuminating, a lot to unpack there. If we had to boil it down, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I'd say three main things. One, the tariff situation is still very much in flux. Recent market optimism might be based on perception as much as reality. Two, that U.S.-Saudi AI partnership is a really big development to watch, with major tech and strategic implications.
Okay. And three,
understanding China's consistent victory narrative requires looking beyond just economics, considering the crucial roles of culture, politics, and national pride, even when both sides are feeling the economic pinch. The whole winner idea is just really debatable.
It really depends on your definition of winning, doesn't it?
Totally. And that leads to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How much do these national stories, these cultural values, shape how we perceive global conflicts and economic outcomes?
Even when the reality on the ground is way more nuanced.
Exactly. How much of what we react to is the hard data, and how much is the story being woven around it?
Definitely food for thought. Well, that wraps up this deep dive. If you enjoyed exploring all this with us, please subscribe to the deep dive wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the next one.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
And hey, quick shout out, our good friend Micky has a seriously funny YouTube channel. You should absolutely check it out. We'll drop a link in the show notes. It's guaranteed laughs.
He is pretty funny.
He really is. Thanks again for diving deep with us today.